Hi everyone and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. Today we're going to spend the entire time together working on the questions that you all have submitted. And I might say that we have 27 pages of questions to go through. My best guess is that we will only get through about half of them today, so we'll probably have to do two. So I'm going to go fairly fast, and I appreciate all of your questions. There were some duplicates, but not as many as I thought there might be. So that's a good thing. Some of you ask 4 and 5 questions in one entry, so I may not get all of those done. So first of all, before we start, I want to thank Cynthia Fisher, one of our viewers, who gave her opinion and answered a number of questions. And that's what our community is all about. Cynthia is usually right on the money when she answers questions. So I usually skim through things, and if someone gives an answer that isn't quite right, I will chime in, and probably some of you have seen me. Sometimes I chime in anyway and say, good job, great conversation. So I love to do that as well. So here we go. The first question came from my own family. We had a nice family dinner over the holiday weekend recently, and my kids brought me these lovely flowers. And I have a granddaughter who is expecting her second baby in probably about 10 days. So we're all really excited. That will be my second great-grandchild. I have a little great-grandson. This one will be a great-granddaughter. And her question was, because baby formula is so difficult to come by, what about freeze-drying breast milk? Well, I think that is a terrific idea. And so we're probably going to try it. I don't see why it won't work at all, but I think that we will try it out and we will bring results to you. So, starting in on the questions. Jim collected this first batch, and I collected some as well. I collected names along with questions, and he didn't. So apologies to those of you whose questions I'm going to read without your name. So, first one on Jim's list was, why do you write the dates on the products you buy and not the expiration dates? Well, one reason is because the expiration dates are already on the product, and I want to know when it is that I bring it into my house, that's all. Next one, do you do any fermenting, and if so, what is your favorite food to ferment? The only thing that I have ever done is sauerkraut, and I loved doing sauerkraut. I have been wanting for a long time to learn how to do pickles, and so I'm already starting to study that. So in the future, we'll be doing some fermenting videos, but I have to learn it first. I probably have to retire first because I don't know how I can fit one more thing in, but we will get there. It just may be a while. Next question, do you vacuum seal vegetable powders or use oxygen absorbers? Either one is just fine, and yes, I do. Once I open a powder and I'm going to be using it frequently, then I don't re-vacuum seal it or put another oxygen absorber in. Either one. Both kill bugs, so it's just fine. If it is a powder that I use infrequently, then I will re-vacuum seal it. Great question. When storing long-term in buckets with oxygen absorbers, are Mylar bags necessary if you plan to use that food in several years or sporadically? Do I need to add more oxygen absorbers because oxygen has gotten in? I'm a little confused about that. All right, so here's what we do. One thing that I want to say is that I have noticed in a lot of our questions that people are very concerned, and rightly so, about wanting to be sure that they are doing things exactly right. A lot of food storage is an exact science, and we try to let you know when there is an exact science connected with something that we do. But there are a lot of things that are personal preference. A lot of things, there are a number of right ways or ways that would work to preserve your food, and this is kind of one of those. So I'll just tell you what we do. We have out in our food storage in our garage, which is not an ideal place, but you know what? It's the only place we have, so that's what works for us. If I bring a bucket of wheat from food storage in the house, we go through a 5-gallon bucket of wheat in about, I'm going to guess, about 6 months with bread baking and other things. Once I open up that bucket, I do not redo any of what was done to it originally, whether it was oxygen absorbers or dry ice or what. So this is really a judgment call. It depends on where you're going to leave the unused food, whether it's in your house or out someplace where rodents or bugs could get to it. If it's going to be a long time before you get back in that bucket, then I would redo with oxygen absorbers. So are Mylar bags necessary? No, they're not. If you store food in a food grade bucket, you don't need to use Mylar bags. We often use 5-gallon buckets that aren't food grade, like from, Jim, where did we get all those buckets? Was that Home Depot? Like 3 years ago that we stored some of our stuff in?
But Home Depot ended up, was doing some research, and the Home Depot buckets are...
They're number twos.
They're number one.
They're number ones?
They are number ones.
Okay.
That's most recent, about a week and a half ago,
Oh,
I noticed.
cool.
So that was one of the things I wanted to check and find out.
But something can be number ones or number twos and still not be food grade.
It's stated food grade.
It is
number
stated
one.
food grade?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. All right, so what we did previously, before Jim did that research, was that we used those orange buckets from Home Depot and with a Mylar bag. So again, it's one of those calls that you can just make for yourself. Next question, how do you know when to remove the rings? And I'm sure that she is talking about removing the rings off of canning jars. USDA says to remove them right after that they have cooled down. And many of you know that I don't remove rings because I really don't have a good place to store them, but I loosen them almost all the way. The reason you remove rings is to allow a false seal to break so that, and you know that it is broken. If it's clamped down with a ring and it's a false seal, then you have the possibility that bacteria could be growing inside that jar. So just remove them if you're going to remove them right after the food is completely cool. I wash the jars in hot soapy water to get any residue off the top. That's when I would remove the rings. A request for more meals in jars. We will certainly work on that. Can you link all of the items that you use? All of us only have a certain amount of hours in the day, and I do the best I can. On our website, we have a whole page of gadgets, and the links are there and the names. Someone requested that we put pictures. I just can't do that. I just do not have the time right now. I keep thinking, well, maybe I could do that after I retire, but it's still going to be a while before I retire, so I won't be able to do that right now. Why do so many folks use Mylar bags instead of regular Food Saver type bags? Again, it's personal preference. So long as those Food Saver bags are stored out of heat and light, the main difference is light penetration. Mylar doesn't let light in, the Food Savers bags would, but if you're storing it in a dark place or in a dark, larger container, they probably work about the same. There's one page down. Someone asks, did I understand that you were going to do a second seal on the Mylar bag? I am married to a safety, I was going to say freak, but he's not a freak, to a safety conscious, wonderful man. And so he likes to have redundancy systems in everything that we do. And so yes, he likes us to double seal our Mylar bags. Just, you don't have to, that's just something that Jim likes. Someone from Europe asks this question: can you use baby sterilizing tablets if you are unable to source the other products? I don't know, because I don't know what baby sterilizing tablets are. If you read the ingredients, the active ingredients on the label, and it is something like chlorine or quaternary ammonia, then yes, those would be just fine. So it just all depends on what the ingredients are. I was wondering whether you could reuse pickle jars for other pickled food as eggs or Piccadilly. That way you would not waste a jar. And the answer to that is sure. Generally in glass jars you can get that pickle smell out anyway, but in plastics it's a little bit more difficult. There were several questions on corn. Now we just started our very first introduction to corn in our last video. So I am going to save all corn questions for a later time. Most of the questions that were asked are going to be answered in the upcoming videos. So that's why I'm not answering anything about corn. Can I use a Mylar bag? Oh yes, we just answered that from someone else. Inside a plastic bucket that isn't food grade, and yes. I wonder if you would be able to do a Russian roulette. We have a video called Russian Roulette where I talk about the danger of botulism when things are improperly canned. I was wondering if you would be able to do a Russian roulette for dehydrating foods and for freeze drying, if there is a base for such a thing. Well, there is, but the principles are the same, particularly if it is low acid. So I'm going to think about that one and see if we need to add any extra information. I've already written it on my list. This person says, we just tried the ground beef. I pressure canned it in beef broth from bouillon. The directions were great, but we do not like the meat at all. The texture is very strange, mushy. I made nachos out of it, but we still didn't like it. We will still save it for an emergency. I was going to can some beef roast, and now I'm not sure I will like it either. Does browning the meat before canning help preserve the texture? This is not the first time that I have heard comments like this, that they don't like the taste or the texture of ground beef that has been canned. And it is different, there's no doubt about it. And I guess that I never had to acquire a taste for it because I kind of grew up on it. So does browning the meat beforehand help? By golly, try it. Do a small batch with some that you have browned and see if that does make a difference. So we're into my questions now, and I have names. So glad tidings for all. I would like to know how to can fresh grown pickled and frozen pigeon peas. So I had to look up pigeon peas, and they're just a pea. And so if you will look up, and for questions like this, here is an answer that is universal, and that is into your search engine, Google for most of us, just type out USDA canning pigeon peas, and if there is a way to do it, it will come up. And the good thing about starting off with USDA when you do a search is that it will also bring up a lot of the state extension offices who might have more information on that. Do you package food right out of the freeze dryer while it's still cold, or do you wait for it to come to room temperature? So the concern, of course, is that there might be condensation on the inside, and it could, of course, allow botulism to, the botulism toxin to be created. We try to catch our batches of freeze-dried food fairly close to being finished when they're warm to eliminate that very problem. And I've been concerned about that too. So the bottom line answer is if the batch has been finished for 2 or 3 hours, then the freeze dryer cools everything down so that ice on the side won't melt and rehydrate the food. So the trays in the food are very cold sometimes. And yes, we wait until they have come to room temperature to ensure that they are dry all the way, and then we package them. That was a great question. Patricia Sweet has asked for information on rehydrating cucumbers, but I think I must have missed the first part of the question. So I did a little reading on rehydrating cucumbers that have been dehydrated rather than freeze-dried. And evidently you can. I've never done it, Patricia, so that's about the only information that I have. Terry Osmond asks, can you dehydrate hamburger beef, and how? And the answer is no. USDA strongly recommends against quite a few foods in a dehydrator. And one of those is meats of any kind except for jerky. No dairy, no cheese, no milk. I know a lot of people do that. I don't. A lot of these things, even before I had a freeze dryer, I did not do anything like that in my dehydrator. Now I have the option of freeze drying those things, which works well. We had several questions on siphoning. Karen Keeler asked one. She did a big batch and a lot of the liquid siphoned out. I want to explain just a little bit about siphoning, and hopefully this will help anyone who might have questions about siphoning. The science behind siphoning is really pretty simple if you understand the principle of pressure and how it works. So when you apply a lot of pressure inside a pressure canner, more pressure means higher boiling temperature. So the boiling temperature inside a pressure canner is way high. It has to get up to 240 degrees inside there to kill botulism spores. So that's way above the boiling temperature where you live and where I live. And so when we allow a pressure canner, when the process stops and we turn off the heat, walk away from it. Let it cool down naturally. And part of the reason for that is that the kill zone time extends into that cool down pressure, and that's the cool down time. And that is really, really important. My own research with my little gadget has shown that to be true, that the kill zone continues even after you have turned off the heat, because the pressure is so high and the temperature is still up in the 240 degrees. So we want that pressure to cool down, to come down slowly, slowly, slowly. And when that happens, there is less siphoning. Here are a couple of more tricks. So when it gets all the way down to where it's safe to open your canner, just crack the lid a little bit so that we know that there's no pressure in there any longer, and then leave the jars in there for about 5 minutes. Related to this question is the idea that sometimes I pull jars out of the pressure canner and they're just boiling, and some in the same batch are not boiling. Does that mean the ones that are not boiling aren't done, aren't safe? No, that isn't it at all. It has to do, when I cringe when I even think about this, and maybe I shouldn't even tell you this, but when I was first doing pressure canning years and years ago, decades ago, once I turned the heat off under that pressure canner, I would lift it up, put it over in the sink, and run water on it to cool it down, because I wanted to get into those jars right away. And I didn't understand why some of the water had come out of the jars. Well, good heavens, what happened was, as I was dropping that temperature so fast, the food inside those jars was super boiling, just boiling like crazy. And then that would cause so much pressure inside the jar that some of the water would force its way out under the lid and siphon. So now when I understand the science about it, I'm very careful about making sure that things cool down naturally. That was a long answer, sorry. Okay, this one is from Bobby Reich. I'm beginning to think Jim is a fictitious person. There is supposed to be a guy in the opening credits. There is the supposed guy in the opening credits, but then you never see him again. Throw him into a question and answer or something now and again, please. Jim, would you join me on camera, please?
Me? Why would I do that?
So, here he is.
Hey, Bobby, how you doing?
So, are you a figment of my
I'm a
mind?
figment of your imagination. I always have been.
Uh-huh. Okay, so he is real, and he's a terrific guy. And
That's what she says.
we couldn't do what we do without the teamwork of both of us.
Here, here.
Okay, thank you.
You want me to leave?
Yes, please.
Why?
I think there's another question coming up that will involve you, so be prepared. This one has to do with Tattler lids. There were 2 or 3 about Tattler lids. My Tattler lids have come unsealed after 2 months on the shelf. Should I continue with Tattler's? And she goes on to explain the failures that she has had, not just with Tattler lids and also with regular metal lids. She has only been canning since 2020, which is a couple of years, and then she asked this question that just really got to me. She said, how much failure should one expect is normal? Oh my goodness sake. I wish that none of us had failure. I wish there wasn't a normal failure level. Before all this trouble with lids and everything else, I so rarely had a failure. In terms of siphoning, in terms of jars that would not seal, I could probably count on one hand, the number of times that I had a failure in like 20 years. I'm having more failures with seals now because of the qualities of the lids, but still not a whole lot. So this is what I would recommend, and I am sure that, and this is Tiggy Winkle, and I love that name. I'm sure she is expressing the same sentiments that many of you have. And so the idea might be that would help is to ensure that you read the instructions very carefully on the Tattler lids. For one, they have you do it just a little bit different than the way that I teach with the double metal lids. I don't teach about Tattlers. I've upset the apple cart with Tattlers using their rings in already used lids. And so just double check yourself. I do that all the time. I double check myself to be sure I am following the recipe or the process exactly. And a lot of times that's where my error comes in. That's the cause of some of my failures. So I am sorry, Tiggy Winkle, that you are having so many failures. And it's not normal to have that many. So we can just keep working and keep learning to reduce the number of failures. This from Ladybug Crafts. I was wondering if grains that have been sprouted and dehydrated last as long as before the sprouting and dehydrating. Just the grains, not the flowers. I don't know. I have never sprouted and dehydrated, but that would be a great experiment for you to work on. And then she asked about my applesauce recipe. I don't have a recipe for applesauce. Our apples on our trees are all different varieties, and so it depends on what variety I'm doing. Sometimes I do a mixture. My applesauce recipe is by taste, including when I add the red hots. Becky Wink asked, can you safely can elderberries or elderberry juice? I found the answer on the Wisconsin Extension, and the answer is no. They are low acid and not recommended. Bob and Robin, I love that name, asks, I bought some packaged freeze-dried fruit at the dollar store and I'm wondering if I can them into jars and vacuum seal them. If so, would this make them last longer? Should I include an oxygen absorber? I don't know if it would make them last longer. You could just try it. Again, it's one of those questions we get asked all the time about how long is the shelf life for this food or that food or the other food. So this will be, my gosh, we're just only on page 8, so this may end up being 3 videos. All of these questions are great, so we may do 3 videos on this. This will be the last question of the day, and what I want to just say a little bit about is that, you know, our storage area is not ideal. We store in our garage, and it gets in the 90s in the summertime. In the wintertime, we have a little space heater, and to keep things from freezing. And so I cannot answer the question of how long will something last. I want to tell you what we do. We, first of all, store the food that we will eat, and then we eat the food that we store. And so we are rotating through our food all the time. And because we do that, then I can check on foods. And this is an example that happened about 6 months ago. These are baby carrots that I freeze-dried several months ago. And as I was going through things, and I put like things together out there, and so when I go grab a jar of this or that or the other, then I can see how many other similar ones I have, so I'm kind of keeping track of that. But these baby carrots, do you see how dry, how whitish they are? And so here is a very dry carrot. It's not even orange in the middle. It is tasteless. I detect no carrot taste whatsoever. These are going in the garbage. And so the shelf life for these, which I expected because they're freeze dried to be several years, turned out to be maybe 6 months. And the lesson that I learned here was I am never going to buy baby carrots or use baby carrots again. Something about the way they are processed, because when I do long carrots from the grocery store or grow our own, they don't do this. It's only these baby carrots. And so who knows how long shelf life is. So it is just good to monitor. We count on most of our foods lasting for 2 years, although we do store grains and beans for long term, for 25 or 30 years. And we have some number 10 cans that go for 30 years. But most of the food that I process, that Jim helps process with me, freeze-dried to hydrated canning, we like to think that we will be using those up within a couple of years. I don't get too far ahead on those for this very reason, because there's a lot of things that I don't know, no matter what people say. Freeze dryers haven't been around for 30 years, so how do we know these are going to last 30 years? So I always am a little bit cautious. So we're going to wrap that up for today, and we will probably do 2 more videos, unless I can get faster. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you for part 2 of answering your questions coming up very soon.